mean, what is a DOWC? A DOWC, the acronym itself is a dealer-owned warranty company. Sometimes you may hear some other acronyms. You may see the acronym out there, DOOC, which is a dealer-owned operating company. It's the same. It's obviously the same type of entity, just uses a different acronym. As we all know in this industry, there's a ton of acronyms out there for all the different dealer participation structures. So I'm sure no one's surprised that there's multiple options for DOWCs when it comes to a naming convention. I think another thing to keep in mind is that DOWC is not a reinsurance company. And what I mean by that is it is the obligor on the contract. And I think that's one of the differentiating factors when people traditionally think of a reinsurance structure is that a DOWC is the obligor. It's a separate entity that actually is the obligor on the contract. It's required to make the fulfillment of the repairs on the car. And it holds itself there, similar to an insurer, but it is on the contract, it is there in replacement of the insurer. So from that aspect, the DOWC is a licensed service contract provider in the state that is writing business. And so obviously, if a dealer has multiple footprints, you're going to have licenses in each one of those states. And obviously, you'll need to abide by the state license and registration laws. And sometimes that comes into play, not necessarily so cumbersome, but depending on the states, it could be just a renewal of the license annually. There could be some obligations to complete some types of forms annually. There may be some annual filing reporting, things of that nature. So what normally happens from a DOWC's perspective is that even though they are the obligor, they tend to have some additional assistance when it comes to administering claims from a third-party administrator. So from that aspect, they don't necessarily have the expertise to adjudicate the claims. They will traditionally get into a contract with an administrator to adjudicate those claims, to potentially utilize them for reporting standpoint, as obviously Mark mentioned before, talking about reporting. I think this is a good point to when an individual dealer or an administrator, for that point, that actually wants to have an administrator obligor, when you're going out to contract who's going to do the adjudication of the claims, you want to make sure that you think about, can they provide the appropriate reporting? And what I mean by that is that can they provide the appropriate numbers that you need to participate in the DOWC and to be able to make sure that you have the appropriate accounting so you can utilize that?
I think it's a couple of big points you made there. I actually got an email from one of my best clients. Initially, they're a little concerned. Here we are running a seminar on DOWC. And I said, look, it's like, the way I got you as a customer is you wanted some special things, and we try and say yes. We don't try and say no. So, part of the presentation I do to my administrative clients is, look, maybe you've offered reinsurance. You haven't done DOWC because your current system doesn't really support it conveniently, right? You got a big dealership group that calls you. You should understand administrators run DOWC programs for the dealer. That's part of what an administrator can do, right? And the question is, how do we position you to say yes versus no? And then we sort of stop at that point. Whether you should or not is a different question, right?
Good point. No, good. A lot of people will ask in the DOWC, they'll say, well, what type of products can offer? And you can see on there, it's the traditional, obviously the vehicle service contracts is your kind of backbone to it. You also can do tire and wheel and prepaid maintenance. And there are other non-insurance products that can be issued through a service contract or a service contract provider license. Sometimes that does vary by state. I will tell you, as always, the state legislations are always changing. And obviously that's where when we have someone who want to come in and form a DOWC, obviously we have them work with some outside legal counsel to make sure in the particular state that they have a footprint in, that they have the capabilities to obviously cover the products they're looking to cover. And those are important things because obviously when they want to have this program, they obviously want to fit as many things in there as they can. But at the same time, there are sometimes limitations on the state they're actually participating with. So the last couple of things on this slide here, we're talking about the difference in a DOWC structure versus a reinsurance structure is that you'll notice it's a failure to perform clip. And I'm sure many people have heard from our conference and other places that, the difference in what they call a first dollar clip versus a failure to perform clip. But really what that means is that failure to perform clip is there in place from a rated carrier that basically says, if this DOWC fails, they will actually cover that loss. And that's kind of the difference there, which That failure to perform clip allows for that additional flexibility as it relates to when the investing piece comes around. So one of the last couple things on people tend to want to ask is, well, are there any minimum capital requirements? And as you can see there may be some higher, minimum capital requirements from a dealer-owned reinsurance company versus, say, an NCFC. But traditionally, you're going to see anywhere from 10,000 on up to 500,000. And you can see the little caveat there that it's the Florida 634 companies, which is definitely a different animal in its aspect. And we'll talk a little bit more about that when we talk about the states and what states are kind of tougher to kind of get formations. The formation cost on the slide here, it obviously says it's less than a reinsurance company, and it normally runs anywhere from $500 to $1,500 per state. Now, I'll tell you that if obviously you have a dealer that has multiple state footprints, some of that cost could get obviously considerably be a little bit more than a reinsurance company. But again, we're talking about the cost of business and the flexibility of what a DOWC can provide. So sometimes the cost obviously, or the benefits will outweigh the cost.